You thought freedom would feel like flight. You imagined it as a kind of lightness, a shedding of weight, a morning where you wake up and the old heaviness simply isn't there anymore. You worked toward it, maybe for years. You read the books. You questioned the assumptions. You pulled back the curtain on the social performances you'd been trained to participate in without question. You stopped pretending things were fine when they weren't. You stopped nodding along to conversations that felt hollow. You trained your mind to see clearly, to think without the distortions of habit and approval-seeking and inherited belief. And then something strange happened. The freedom arrived, or something that felt like freedom, but it didn't look anything like what you had expected. Instead of lightness, there was a peculiar kind of weight. Instead of joy, there was a sober, quiet, sometimes unsettling clarity. Instead of belonging more fully to the world around you, you found yourself standing slightly apart from it, watching it with eyes that couldn't unknow what they had come to understand. You thought freedom would bring you closer to life. And in some ways it has, but in ways you hadn't anticipated, it has also made certain things harder, not easier. And today I want to explore why that is, what it means, and what a genuinely free mind actually becomes when it has done the work of thinking clearly. The popular imagination of a free mind is almost always wrong. We tend to picture it as something expansive and joyful, a consciousness that has shed its chains and now dances through experience with a kind of effortless grace. Freedom from illusion, we assume, must mean freedom into happiness. But this conflation, the assumption that clarity naturally produces comfort, is itself one of the most persistent illusions we carry. Hannah Arendt understood something that most self-help traditions carefully avoid. Genuine thinking is not a path to ease. It is a practice that places you in constant friction with the unreflective world. And the free mind, the mind that has genuinely committed to seeing without the consolations of comfortable fiction, does not become lighter. It becomes, in a very specific and meaningful sense, more alone. This aloneness is not loneliness in the ordinary sense. Loneliness is the pain of wanting connection and not finding it. What I am describing is something more precise. It is the condition of having developed an interiority, a rich and complex inner world, that does not map neatly onto the surfaces most social interaction demands. Arendt distinguished between solitude and loneliness in a way that almost no one else has managed with such clarity. Solitude for her was the condition in which you are alone with yourself and in genuine company, because the thinking self is always in dialogue with itself, always working through questions, always alive. Loneliness, by contrast, was the condition of being deserted even by yourself, of having no inner life to inhabit, of being thrown entirely onto the surface of things with no depth to retreat into. The free mind, the genuinely thinking mind, is rarely lonely in this second sense, but it is frequently solitary in the first, and that solitude, which is in many ways a gift, is also a kind of cost that nobody warned you about. What does a truly free mind actually become? Let us think about this carefully, because the answer is counterintuitive at almost every turn. It does not become serene, at least not in the way serenity is usually portrayed, as a smooth, undisturbed surface, as emotional flatness dressed up as peace. The free mind becomes capable of a different kind of serenity, one that coexists with genuine disturbance, one that can hold contradiction without collapsing under it. But it is not comfortable in any conventional sense. It has given up comfort as a primary value, and this is not a small thing. Comfort is deeply important to human beings. The desire to feel settled, to feel that the world makes sense, to feel that you belong to something larger than yourself without having to interrogate what that something is. These are not trivial desires. They are woven into the basic architecture of human psychology. When you begin thinking seriously, when you begin questioning rather than accepting, you are working against some of those very deep instincts, and the free mind that emerges from that process is not a mind that has transcended human needs. It is a mind that has accepted certain costs in exchange for something it values more, the integrity of seeing clearly. If this perspective is opening something in you, consider subscribing. I explore these questions every week, and I would genuinely love to have you along for the journey. Let me offer you a specific picture of what I mean. Consider the experience of attending a social gathering, a party, a work event, a family dinner, where the conversation moves along well-established channels. People talk about surface things with enormous energy. There is performance everywhere. The performance of happiness, the performance of certainty, the performance of not being troubled by the things that in private moments trouble everyone. For someone who has not yet done the work of thinking, these gatherings can feel natural, even nourishing. But for someone who has spent real time in the space of genuine thought, who has sat with hard questions and let them change how they see, these same gatherings can feel almost surreal. Not because the people there are bad or shallow, but because the gap between what is being said and what everyone is actually experiencing has become visible in a way it wasn't before. You can see the performance. You can see the agreements people have made not to speak about certain things. And you cannot simply stop seeing it. The free mind, in this sense, pays a tax on its clarity. It cannot return to the comfortable unreflectiveness of before. It cannot unsee what it has seen. I know that many of you watching this have felt exactly this at some point, maybe many times. You have sat in rooms where you felt the gap between the conversation happening and the reality you were perceiving, and you have felt, along with the clarity, a profound isolation. You have wondered whether something was wrong with you, whether your inability to simply relax into the surface of things was a flaw, a kind of social malfunction, a deficiency you should be working to correct. I want you to sit with that question for a moment, because it is one of the most important questions you can ask. And I want to ask you directly. How long have you been carrying the weight of seeing clearly in a world that often seems to reward not seeing? How long have you been telling yourself the problem is you, when what you are actually experiencing is the natural consequence of a mind that has genuinely done the work of thinking? If words feel hard right now, just type this in the comments. I see it too. That is enough. Because someone else watching this needs to know they are not the only one who has stood in a crowded room feeling perfectly and inexplicably alone with what they understand. Here is what Arendt would have us notice. The problem is not that you see too much. The problem is that we have no adequate language for describing what genuine thinking actually costs. We have entire libraries of literature about the benefits of awareness, of consciousness, of waking up to reality. But we are remarkably silent about the price. And this silence is not innocent. It serves a function. If people understood in advance what genuine thinking would do to them, to their relationships, to their capacity for easy enjoyment, to their ability to participate naively in the comfortable fictions that hold social life together, many would hesitate. Perhaps that hesitation would be wise, perhaps not. But the hesitation would be real. And the fact that we never name the cost honestly means that people who arrive at genuine clarity feel as though they have done something wrong. They have reached a destination that promised only freedom and found something more complicated, and they assume the complication is their failure. It is not. Let us think about what the free mind actually gains, because I do not want to leave you with only the shadow side of this. The gains are real and they are profound, even if they are not what the books promised. The first gain is what I would call the capacity for genuine contact with reality. Most of us, for most of our lives, experience the world through a thick layer of interpretation, of story, of what we expect to see rather than what is actually there. We see people not as they are, but as what they represent to us. We experience events not in their particularity, but filtered through our accumulated fears and desires. The free mind, the mind that has genuinely examined its own assumptions, begins to have moments of something different, a strange, clear, almost impersonal contact with what is actually happening. These moments are not comfortable. Reality encountered directly is neither comforting nor hostile. It is simply what it is, and learning to be with what is, without immediately reaching for interpretation or narrative, is one of the rarest and most demanding capacities a human being can develop. But when it is developed, even partially, even intermittently, it brings with it something that no amount of positive thinking can replicate: the grounded, sober sense of being genuinely present in your own life. The second gain is the end of a certain kind of suffering. Not all suffering. The free mind does not transcend pain or loss or disappointment, but it does eventually lose its relationship to a particular kind of suffering, the suffering that comes from refusing to see things as they are. This is actually the majority of human suffering. We suffer not only because life is difficult, but because we insist on believing it should be otherwise. We suffer not only because people disappoint us, but because we had constructed fictions about who they were that did not match reality. We suffer not only because the world is unjust, but because we had promised ourselves that justice was the natural order of things, and the evidence of its absence comes as repeated shock. The free mind, having examined its own constructions, begins to loosen its grip on these fictions. Not with resignation, not with the kind of deadened acceptance that simply gives up on desiring anything, but with something more like what Arendt meant when she spoke about thinking as a form of living. The mind that thinks genuinely begins to encounter things more directly, with fewer of the protective layers that, while offering comfort in the short term, create enormous suffering over time. This connects to something Arendt observed about the relationship between thinking and action. One of the most surprising things about genuine freedom of mind is that it does not make you passive. The popular image of the philosopher, of the deeply thinking person, tends toward a kind of withdrawn contemplation, a figure who sits apart from the world and observes it from a careful distance. And there is truth in that image, but it is only half of something. Arendt was insistent that thinking, real thinking, is not the enemy of action. It is actually its only genuine foundation, what she called thoughtlessness. The condition of acting without examining what you are doing and why is where the greatest dangers lie. The person who participates in every social convention without questioning it, who carries out every expected role without examining its costs, who perpetuates every system without noticing what it does to people, that person is not free. They are efficient, they are productive, they are often pleasant company. But they are not free, and their actions, however well-intentioned, carry the particular danger of the unexamined. They can become instruments of harm precisely because no one is watching, because no one inside is asking whether this should be done at all. The free mind, by contrast, acts from a different basis. Its actions may be fewer, they may be more hesitant, more carefully chosen, more conscious of their own contingency. But they have something behind them that unreflective action never can. The presence of a genuine self who has chosen this, who has examined the alternatives, who has sat with the question of what matters and come to some provisional but honest answer. This is not a small thing. In a world saturated with activity and almost entirely bereft of genuine deliberation, the person who acts from a truly examined position is doing something genuinely rare. But I want to return to the question of what a free mind becomes, because I think we have not yet touched its most counterintuitive dimension. The free mind becomes, over time, deeply comfortable with not knowing. This sounds simple, perhaps even obvious, but it is actually one of the most radical transformations a human consciousness can undergo. We are built to want certainty. The nervous system rewards resolution, the feeling that things are settled, that the question has been answered, that the danger has been assessed and found manageable. Uncertainty activates something very close to threat, and in a world that offers abundant certainty for sale, in the form of ideologies and belief systems and confident personalities who will tell you exactly how things are and what you should do about them, the pressure to purchase that certainty is enormous. The free mind has learned to resist this pressure, not through effort, not by gritting its teeth and tolerating uncertainty, but through something more fundamental, a change in its relationship to the unknown. It has discovered that not knowing, held honestly, is actually a more accurate position than most of the certainties on offer. It has found that sitting with a question, genuinely sitting with it, rather than rushing to fill the silence with an answer, produces a different quality of understanding than the kind that arrives too quickly. It has learned that the person who is comfortable saying "I don't know" is often far closer to the truth than the person who is very certain indeed. Arendt's concept of natality is useful here, though it is rarely discussed in this context. Natality, for Arendt, was the fundamental human capacity for new beginnings, the fact that every human being who enters the world brings with them the possibility of something genuinely new, something that has never existed before. This was not mysticism for her, but a political and philosophical observation. That human freedom consists precisely in this capacity to begin, to introduce something into the world that was not there before, to act in ways that are not simply the continuation of what came before. The free mind, I want to suggest, is a mind that has recovered this relationship to natality in the domain of thought. It has stopped assuming that the conclusions it should reach are the ones it has always reached, or the ones everyone around it has reached, or the ones that have the comfort of familiarity. It approaches each genuine question with the willingness to be surprised, to be changed, to arrive somewhere it had not anticipated. This is not the same as being impressionable or uncommitted. It is the opposite. It is the sign of a mind so genuinely committed to understanding that it will not sacrifice understanding for the comfort of already knowing. If what I am exploring here speaks to something you have been quietly living with, I want you to know that you are part of a community of people who are doing this same difficult, necessary work. I create these explorations for people who are not satisfied with surface answers, who want to sit in the questions rather than rush to the comfort of easy conclusions. If that is you, I invite you to subscribe. Not because you need more content in your life, but because this kind of thinking is easier when you know that others are doing it alongside you. We are a community of people who have accepted the cost of seeing clearly, and who have found that cost, for all its difficulty, to be worth paying. Hit the subscribe button if this feels like home, and leave a comment telling me what in this exploration has resonated most deeply. I read everyone, and your reflections genuinely add to my own understanding. There is another dimension to the free mind that is almost never discussed, and it concerns its relationship to other people. There is a common assumption that as a mind becomes more genuinely free, it becomes more separate, more self-sufficient, less in need of the messy, unpredictable, often disappointing world of human relationship. And there is a partial truth here. The free mind does become less dependent on others for its sense of its own reality. It no longer needs constant external validation to feel that its perceptions are real, that its experiences are legitimate, that its understanding of things is acceptable. This independence is real, and it is precious. But it does not mean the free mind becomes indifferent to others. In fact, the opposite can be true. When you no longer need people to confirm your reality, when you are no longer using them primarily as mirrors for your own self-image, you become capable of encountering them more fully as themselves. The philosopher Iris Murdoch, who was influenced by many of the same currents that shaped Arendt, spoke about what she called the just and loving gaze, the ability to see another person as they actually are, rather than as a function of your own needs and fears. This kind of seeing, this quality of genuine attention, becomes more available as the mind becomes more free. The free mind can be genuinely curious about another person, interested in the particularity of their experience, moved by their reality, without being consumed by it. This is a different kind of connection than the anxious, needy, mutually dependent connection that often passes for intimacy. It is rarer and in many ways more sustaining. And yet, and this is the paradox that the truly free mind must learn to live with, this quality of genuine attention can itself be isolating. When you can see people clearly, you see not only their beauty and their struggle, but also the places where they are not present to themselves, where they are operating from patterns they have never examined, where they are saying one thing and living another. You see the gap between who people present themselves as being and who they actually are, not with contempt, but with a kind of clear-eyed recognition that is very different from ordinary social perception. And this seeing, compassionate as it may be, creates a distance. Not because you are withdrawing from people, but because genuine seeing, like genuine thinking, cannot pretend. You cannot unknow what you understand about someone. You cannot relate to them as though you share an illusion that you no longer share. And so there is sometimes a quality of careful guardedness in the free mind's deepest connections, not because it does not care, but because it cares in a way that the other person may not quite understand, in a way that includes an honesty about what is actually happening that most social relationships quietly agree to exclude. This is the dimension of freedom that most frightens people when they begin to sense it coming. They can accept the idea of thinking more clearly. They can accept the idea of questioning their assumptions. They can accept the idea that they might see the world differently than they did before. But the idea that genuine freedom of mind might change their relationships, might make certain kinds of connection harder to sustain, might create a kind of internal solitude that no amount of external company can fully address, that is frightening. And it should be taken seriously, not dismissed. The transformation we are talking about is real, and it asks something real of you. It asks you to give up the comfort of relating to people through shared illusion, and to find instead the harder but more honest ground of relating to people through shared reality, with all the difficulty and incompleteness that entails. Here is what I want to say to you directly, because I think it matters. The loneliness you feel as a genuinely thinking person, the sense of standing slightly apart from the world you inhabit, of being unable to fully participate in the unreflective social life that surrounds you, this is not pathology. It is not depression, though it can coexist with depression. It is not antisocial personality, though it can be confused with it. It is the natural condition of a mind that has genuinely done the work of thinking in a world that still, in most of its daily operations, does not particularly value that work. Arendt knew this. She lived it. She was a figure who could participate brilliantly in public life, who had profound and sustaining relationships, who was deeply engaged with the world and its problems. And she also spent her entire intellectual life exploring the fundamental difficulty of being a genuinely thinking person in a world organized around the avoidance of thought. She did not resolve this difficulty. She sat with it, examined it, wrote about it with extraordinary precision and care, and in doing so made it possible for others, for you and for me, to recognize it as what it is. Not a personal failure, but a structural feature of what it means to take thinking seriously. The free mind does not arrive at a destination. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about it. We are conditioned to think of freedom as a state, as something you achieve and then maintain, as a plateau you reach after the difficult climb. But genuine freedom of mind is not a plateau. It is a practice, ongoing, sometimes exhausting, never complete. The thinking that produces it is not something you do once and finish. Every day presents new assumptions to examine, new patterns to question, new places where habit and fear and desire are quietly shaping perception without announcing themselves. The free mind is not the mind that has finished thinking. It is the mind that has committed to thinking as a way of being, that has accepted the permanent, open-ended, sometimes uncomfortable practice of not taking its own conclusions for granted. This is both more demanding and more interesting than the image of freedom as a rival. It means there is always more to understand, always further to go, always another layer beneath the one you have just examined. And this, in the end, is what I want to leave you with. A reframing of what you may have understood freedom to be. Perhaps you have been thinking of it as a kind of final clarity, a state in which everything makes sense, in which you are no longer troubled by uncertainty or confusion, in which you have sorted through the fictions and arrived at solid ground. Perhaps you have been measuring your progress by how close you are to that imagined state, and finding yourself, repeatedly, not quite there, still confused about some things, still uncertain, still troubled by questions that will not resolve. If so, I want to offer you a different measure. Not, how settled have I become? But rather, how honestly am I inhabiting my own uncertainty? Not, have I arrived at the truth? But, am I willing to keep following the question wherever it leads, even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable? Not, have I achieved freedom? But am I practicing it today, in this thought, in this perception, in this conversation? Because the truly free mind does not become what you imagined. It does not become serene in the way serenity is advertised. It does not become invulnerable. It does not become separate from the world's difficulty or immune to its pain. What it becomes is something more honest and ultimately more useful than any of those things. It becomes a mind that can be genuinely present to what is happening, that can think about its own thinking, that can encounter reality without immediately covering it over with the nearest available fiction. It becomes a mind that knows the cost of clarity and has chosen to pay it anyway, not because it has no other options, but because it has examined the alternatives and found them, for all their comfort, to be fundamentally unsatisfying. And in that choice, that ongoing, daily, quietly difficult choice, there is a kind of freedom that has nothing to do with flight and everything to do with staying. Staying with the question, staying with the uncertainty, staying fully in the life you are actually living, rather than the one you are waiting to begin once everything is finally resolved. That life does not resolve. This is not a tragedy. It is perhaps the deepest form of the good news that genuinely thinking people can receive. That the uncertainty you are sitting with is not a problem to be fixed, but a condition to be inhabited. And that inhabiting it honestly, with as much clarity and courage as you can bring to it, is the fullest expression of what it means to be free. I want to take a moment here because I think this is the heart of what so many of you are actually navigating, and it deserves to be said plainly. You are not failing at freedom because it still feels difficult. You are not failing at consciousness because clarity has not made everything easier. You are doing something genuinely hard, something that the world does not particularly reward and often does not recognize, and you are doing it because you cannot do otherwise. Because a mind that has once genuinely thought cannot simply stop. It cannot return to unreflectiveness any more than you can return to not knowing something once you have come to understand it. And that irreversibility, which can feel like a burden, is also the mark of something real. You have become something, not what you imagined, something more complicated, more costly, and in the ways that matter most, more genuinely alive than the version of yourself that had not yet paid the price of thinking clearly. If what I have shared here today speaks to the particular kind of loneliness and clarity that you have been living with, I want to invite you into something. This channel is for people like you, people who have found that genuine thinking has changed them in ways that are hard to explain to others. People who feel the cost of consciousness not as an abstract philosophical concept, but as a daily lived reality. People who are done with surfaces, but have not yet found adequate language for the depths. I make these explorations every week, not as a teacher with all the answers, but as someone committed to the same ongoing practice that you are committed to. Someone who believes that thinking together, even through a screen, even in the strange asynchronous way that video makes possible, is better than thinking alone. If that sounds like the company you have been looking for, subscribe. Not as a favor to me, but as an act of commitment to your own continued exploration. And leave a comment. Tell me what question you are sitting with. Tell me where this exploration landed for you, what it named that had not yet been named. I read every comment, and what you share genuinely shapes where these conversations go next. The free mind, in the end, is not the mind that has escaped the human condition. It is the mind that has looked at the human condition without flinching, that has accepted its contradictions and its costs and its irreducible uncertainty, and has chosen, in full awareness of all of it, to keep thinking. That is not a small thing. That is perhaps the most fully human thing it is possible to do. And if you are here, if you have watched this far, if what I have been describing sounds like the interior of your own experience, then you are already doing it. You are already free, not in the way you imagined, but in the only way that is actually real. The work is not finished, it is never finished, and that, quietly and without fanfare, is exactly as it should be.